And so for people with complex trauma and attachment wounds, the system is primed for hypervigilance, even subtle cues of exclusion, like you said, the social media, a glance, a text left unread, that can set off outsized protective responses. And from an NSI perspective, jealousy isn't a toxic flaw. It's a signal that the nervous system perceives relational threat and is mobilizing those protective outputs. And so when these brain circuits light up, they don't just stay in the brain, they set the whole nervous system in motion. You don't have to keep trying to think your way out of survival. Your body already knows the way home. It just needs the right input. At rewiretrial.com, you'll get a 2-week trial of guided neurosomatic classes that help you reconnect to your body, release stored stress, and build capacity for joy, safety, and rest. We'll walk you through everything step by step with a 2-week starter journey, and you'll begin to notice small but powerful shifts. Shifts like better sleep, more presence, less reactivity. If you're ready to move beyond awareness and into embodied change, come join us at rewiretrial.com. This conversation is about jealousy and why it matters for anyone who's ever felt that gut punch of being left out, ignored, or unseen. We're talking about those full body reactions, chest tightening, stomach dropping, racing thoughts that so often get mislabeled as weakness or immaturity. If you've ever carried the shame of, why am I even feeling this? This episode is for you.
Yeah, what if we reframed jealousy not as a character flaw, but as a survival response? Neuroscience shows that jealousy lights up the same brain regions as physical pain. Your nervous system actually registers social exclusion as a threat. And in complex trauma, those responses get amplified, leaving us hyper-attuned to signals of abandonment or betrayal. With our guest, Dr. Joli Hamilton, we'll dive into the neuroscience of jealousy, how attachment wounds shape its intensity, and why shame compounds it, and how neurosomatic tools can transform jealousy from reactivity into powerful information for healing. Welcome to Trauma Rewired, the podcast that teaches you about your nervous system, how trauma lives in the body, and what you can do to heal. I'm your co-host, Elisabeth Kristof, founder of brainbase.com, an online community that uses applied neurology and somatics for personal development, growth, and behavior change. And I'm also the founder of the Neurosomatic Intelligence Coaching Certification, an ICF-accredited course for therapists, coaches, and practitioners to bring the nervous system and root change into all of the good work that you do.
And I'm your co-host, Jennifer Wallace. I'm a neurosomatic psychedelic preparation and integration guide, and I bring your nervous system into peak somatic experiences. And I'm also one of the educators at the NSI Coaching Certification. And so make sure you hit subscribe if you're on your favorite audio platform right now. And remember that we're on YouTube, so you can also find us and watch us there. Dr. Joli, we are so thrilled to welcome you back to Trauma Rewired. Dr. Joli Hamilton is a relationship coach and NSI certified practitioner as well. Joli has developed her career to understanding jealousy not as a flaw, but as a powerful teacher in our relational lives. Together, we'll explore, as part of our season on emotions and post-traumatic growth, how nervous system regulation and self-compassion can shift our relationship with jealousy so it no longer runs the show, but becomes a doorway to deeper connection and growth. Welcome, Dr. Joli. Could you please share a bit about yourself and your work and why this topic of jealousy is so important to you?
Oh, absolutely. And thank you for starting off with that, because jealousy is important to me because it's an opportunity. It's an opportunity that most of us desperately do not want to have show up in our lives. Certainly one that I have tried to avoid in the past, but I do this work because I experience pretty intense jealousy. And I also practice what I consider complex relationships. I typically have multiple romantic relationships at the same time. So personally, I care about jealousy because jealousy comes knocking on my door. And in my work, I have found over the years that people experiencing jealousy often don't realize how it's just this low-level threat system that's going off all the time. And so it impacts everything else. It impacts our parenting, it impacts our work. And when I learned to work with my jealousy as an opportunity, it changed things for me. And I'm really grateful for that, even though it can be hard on a day-to-day basis to be grateful for jealousy because it sets off all the threat mechanisms.
Oh, I can relate so much to this, and in so much of my past life before I knew anything about the nervous system or neurosomatics or was on a healing journey, jealousy was a huge issue for me in relationships, romantic relationships, friendships, and then the shame that would come with that, the big levels of dysregulation. So I think this is a really important conversation and topic. I'm glad that we're going to dive deep into it. Before we do, though, I want to define jealousy a little bit. And I'd love for you to clarify the difference between jealousy and envy to really start to pick apart some of these nuances.
Yes, this is super important because at least in North American culture, at the very least, we have conflated the words jealousy and envy. We tend to just use them at the same time. We'll say like, "Oh, I'm so jealous of that. Oh my God, you got new shoes." Like that's not actually jealousy. Jealousy is the perception of threat that I experience when I feel a threat to a valued relationship with another person. So I've got to see a triangle. That's how I know jealousy is present. It's myself as the jealous person, my beloved, my valued other. Hey, it doesn't have to be just a romantic valued other. This can be a valued mentor or a coach. It could be somebody who your friendship is deep and you value that, right? Anyone we value the relationship with. And then we see the third point of the triangle. That is the perceived interrupter. The perceived interrupter is not, they don't necessarily have to be doing anything, right? But if we perceive them as a threat, boom, that's how I know jealousy is at work. This is different from envy. I can experience envy with just one other person in the picture. I want to be what they are. I want to have what they have. I want to have the results they have. I want to have the car they have. I want to have the boyfriend they have, whatever it is. That's envy. And of course, jealousy and envy can show up at the same time as well. And so we may be dealing with both jealousy and envy because if I perceive that interrupter and I compare myself to them, when I do, it's very likely that I'm going to find myself envying something about them. I want to be like them. I want to find myself feeling more pretty, more intellectual, more witty, funnier, whatever it is. In that comparison, I'm caught in my envy. And when jealousy and envy show up at the same time, we really have two of the gnarliest and most ignored emotions in our bank of like, hey, nobody really wants to go after that, but still, they're going to show up and they're often going to show up at the same time.
Wow, it's already, like, so enlightening just to learn the definition of the 2 words, because you're right, we use jealousy all the time. And so let's unpack these components just a little bit deeper in the relationship of social survival, because I think that's really important, especially in the context of complex trauma and where attachment is the root of dysregulation. So jealousy has deep roots in human survival. Keeping bonds intact means access to resources, protection and belonging, and it signals potential threat to attachment security. So Jolie, could you speak to why would a feeling that's so uncomfortable actually have an adaptive role, and how jealousy has served us from an evolutionary and social perspective?
Yeah, this is one of my favorite things to have ever learned about jealousy. And that is that we're hardwired to experience jealousy from infancy. When we think about jealousy, we often think about our romantic connections. We think about maybe being a teenager and feeling swept off of our feet and then feeling absolutely swept by the tidal wave of jealousy. But think earlier. Think back to when you have an infant in your arms and that infant needs you for survival. In that moment, the only thing the infant can do when they feel an interruption to the bond with their caregiver is to freak out, right? What else can they do? They can cry. That is the mechanism. And so researchers have actually seen that jealousy can be spotted way back, 5 months, 6 months old. And we can see it specifically when there's an interruption from a third person. So babies interact differently when they are put in a study condition. If you give mom, say, a book to read, a baby will react one way. You have a baby doll in mom's arms, infant acts a different way. So we can see that jealousy is rooted not just in our, oh, we need to be socially included, but in our, we need to be socially included or we die.
Mm.
And then we fast forward into our later romantic attachments, and the vast majority of us will transition into feeling our attachment system attached to our romantic connections. hopefully also to some of our friendships. I mean, that's actually what I would hope for most of us. And so we feel that same system online. But in the meantime, in the 10 years or 20 years between that infancy and when we start to feel romantic jealousy, it's the same mechanism, and no one generally has received any education about what do I do when this shows up? What happens when I feel jealous? So we go into that full protection. We go into a full fear response. And then, of course, we're going to respond in the way that is most reasonable for us. And we all, as you know, have different strategies that we'll lean into.
Yeah, it's really fascinating to think about, and I think it provides so much more context, understanding that deep survival component of social attachment, and that when we can really start to understand what's happening with this emotion, then we don't have to just repress it, shove it down, pretend like it's not happening until it explodes in big moments of dysregulation. And so I want to break down a little bit some of the neuro behind this experience of jealousy. So there's some brain regions that we've been talking about all season on here. We have our anterior cingulate cortex. And during an experience of jealousy, the ACC would actually light up in the same way that it does for physical pain. So social rejection is literally actually hurting in our body. It's that threat output of pain that we experience with that. And then also our insular cortex, which we've talked about as being a huge player in our interoceptive system, understanding and interpreting the signals from inside, creates those sensations of, or interprets those sensations of a visceral sting, that gut punch feeling, or maybe the heat you feel with jealousy. And it's linking those body sensations to emotional meaning, giving it that meaning of social threat. And then in that threat context, our amygdala is going to ramp up threat detection, scanning for cues of betrayal or exclusion or loss. And we become really hypervigilant for looking for that in someone's facial expression, vocal tone, in the environment, interpreting everything that they say through that lens. And so altogether, these circuits are showing jealousy is not irrational, but it's how we've switched into that survival-based protective neurotag and internal state, because our emotions in general are not irrational. They're motivators to try to keep a social connection attached that we need for our survival. So when someone says you're just being irrational or insecure, neuroscience would actually say the opposite, that this is a real biological wired signal. And when you think about your work, and I know that you have dived really deep into all of this in your research, how does reframing jealousy in this way change how you approach it with yourself, with your clients? What kind of shifts come from that?
Yeah. Well, this is huge, Elizabeth, because as you follow that pathway, right? These millisecond long pathways that get us from a point of receiving a bit of information and interpreting it and attaching it to a story that can be in many of us, that story of betrayal, of social exclusion, that is not it's not a small story. So now, first off, one of the things I see is we start spiraling. We spiral up and out. We spiral down in shame. We're spiraling in every direction
Mhm.
because this is connected to so many stories of lack of safety. But I also want to just address this idea of rational versus irrational, because something I often feel like people need to hear said out loud is your jealousy itself, like as a source of wisdom, it is rational. Like Elizabeth, you just described. It is rational because, yep, it makes sense. It is input, it is giving you information. And sometimes our source of that information is incorrect.
Mhm.
Sometimes the source of information is actually starting with a baseline story of I am not safe. I am not wanted. This relationship is not safe for me. And from there, I can invent a perceived interrupter. And this is where jealousy gets a little more complicated than some of our other difficult emotions like anger and sadness, because I may have a baseline story that sets me up to detect jealousy, to detect the signals for jealousy, even when they're not present. So, this is really complicated because for any individual, we need to actually comb through what's the data you're receiving? because I don't want anyone to dismiss the wisdom of their jealousy. And I also don't want to continue that spiral, because if I feel unsafe in romantic relationships, if I say experienced early betrayal or experienced a romantic betrayal that has imprinted on me, hey, it's not safe unless I'm being hypervigilant, then I may just be flipping through social media. And we have some studies showing that jealousy does get worse the more we are on social media, because we're exposed to so much input about relationships and about what people are feeling without any context around it. But I could be scrolling and I could see my partner having liked someone's photo. And from that tiny little heart on the left-hand corner of my screen, I may spin up an entire narrative of, I am not safe, this is a betrayal, everything's going to fall apart, when I don't yet have enough information. I and so the jealousy itself is rational, and I need to dig into what's going on for me, because some of us really do experience quite a lot more or more intensity when jealousy comes up. And then the real question, what's the action I'm going to take? What
Mhm.
happens next? Because when jealousy spins up, a lot of us immediately, because it is a social emotion, we immediately point to our partner and say, you have to stop whatever the hell this is. Stop it immediately. Because I am not going to feel this. I don't want to feel this. And we forget, wait, the feeling started here. So it's a both and. There may be real things that are unsaid in your relationship that need to be said. There may be a lack of agreements, a lack of clarity around what is our fidelity agreement and what constitutes betrayal or cheating. Because most people don't actually have crystal clarity explicitly shared about this. So we're making the stories from a lack of information. And then, yeah, we go to our threat responses, and it's really intense. And for many people, it will be among the most intense experiences they ever describe. That's why many people now, rather than saying the word jealousy, they'll say, I'm having attachment panic, because it describes better for them. They're like, but it's bigger than just jealousy, because they've learned that jealousy is just something immature people feel, or jealousy is just something you feel if you're insecure. So they dismiss the idea of jealousy and they go to this phrase, attachment panic,
Mm.
which in a way does describe what's happening really accurately. You're in a complete panic state at your attachment system level.
Mm.
Really intense.
I don't hate it.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
Honestly, I don't hate it. It's not bad. And like, I think one thing that we're leading into too is like, this just doesn't live in the brain. It lives in our bodies. And when jealousy does activate these networks of the ACC, the insula and the amygdala, those circuits immediately drive nervous system responses. And so let's talk about the F responses and those threat prediction triggers of survival outputs. So like with fight, you might get into accusations or controlled behaviors, whereas like with flight, you might start pulling away, shutting down communication. And then with freeze, you could start going numb, being unable to speak. And then with fawn, we have that appeasing, that over accommodating partner. And so for people with complex trauma and attachment wounds, the system is primed for hypervigilance, even subtle cues of exclusion. Like you said, the social media, a glance, a text left unread, that can set off outsized protective responses. And from an NSI perspective, jealousy isn't a toxic flaw. It's a signal that the nervous system perceives a relational threat and is mobilizing those protective outputs. And so when these brain circuits light up, they don't just stay in the brain. They set the whole nervous system in motion. From your perspective, Joli, what kinds of behaviors do you see jealousy triggering in relationships? And for those of us with a history of trauma, jealousy can sometimes feel like an ambush, and especially when that small cue sets off this huge wave. How do you see trauma and attachment history amplifying jealousy responses?
Yeah, well, in so many ways, so many ways. So first off, many people will actually imagine that, somebody who uses more avoidant attachment strategies, they turn away, that they might feel less jealousy. But what I see in my office is that they're less aware when jealousy shows up, because they turn away quicker, right? Or if they go into a fight response, it goes inward instead of outward. And so it gets kind of tricky. We actually have to get into the weeds a little bit to see what's going on at a really nuanced level. Like, what if we peel back the layers here? What are the strategies that you learned to use? I see people who are more in the anxious strategy set. They will tend to get hypervigilant. They'll often do things like monitor phone usage or check, open up their partner's phone or use the tracking device on their phones. And the interesting thing is, for some people, there's this continual imagination that the hypervigilance will soothe them, even though when they're in a regulated state, they recognize that it doesn't. It actually amps things up and makes things harder. But the desire is there, right? The reactivity is there. It's present. And that's just a couple of things. Another big one is turning the wound toward myself. I will not just fawn as in I will make this person who I feel like might leave me. I will make them feel better. I'll try to pull them in, but also a fawn response that turns into an enormous story of you deserve this. That like it's so perverse, right? We twist this around and I deserve to be left becomes actually safer because now
Mm.
when I perceive them as turning away or I perceive this interruption, it's back in my ball, like the ball's back in my court. And I see people's shoulders collapse in and they get smaller. There's also, of course, big violent behavior that sometimes comes up. Um, we can't overlook that. The last study I saw said 74% of domestic violence reports have some element of jealousy listed in them.
Wow.
We can't overlook the fact that this is actually dangerous. This is not, we can't just dismiss jealousy and say, oh, it's just, I am infamous at this point for saying jealousy has wisdom. And I believe that. And we have to treat it with care because in our cultural context, jealousy has been used as an excuse for violence for thousands of years.
Mm.
So, in that context, well, I may feel justified. I may feel like it is completely reasonable to take violent action, even if in my culture, anger wouldn't justify that violent action. Jealousy gets this sort of special use case. So, we really, really do have to dig in. I would love it if every single person started having a conversation about what jealousy is for them, how it shows up, but many people just push it away because even the idea that they feel jealous is too stressful. And even that sets off a threat response. And so I go inside, I feel jealousy. And before I've even allowed the word to form, I've even allowed myself to take in the idea that I am feeling jealous. No, it's gone. So I hear a lot of people in that camp, they won't describe being jealous. In fact, many of them will do what I did years ago. I just stopped using the word jealousy. I would say, yeah, I guess I feel a little insecure, but I'm not jealous. Or I guess I'm a little worried about this, but I'm not jealous. Or I mean, sure, I don't trust my partner, but I'm not jealous. Even though everything they've just described was jealousy because we have demonized jealousy itself. So we don't have a cultural conversation about this. And so our threat responses come out as just great, big, giant disasters, inward or outward.
Yeah, you just brought up so many important things. I think one is as we're having this conversation, though we are talking about this is a natural, adaptive, protective response to maintain social attachment, that we can be wired for that hypervigilance around that, like you both talked about. And so recognizing that yes, there is wisdom here and it's a protective output so we can have some compassion for ourselves, but there is still a call to work with the nervous system in this this is an invitation to where can I repattern, where can I start to make shifts in my nervous system and my perspective so that I'm not always going into these big reactions that can sometimes be harmful.
Yeah.
to other
Yeah.
people and to myself. And, you and I started working together years ago, Jolie, when we would do like workshops together on jealousy and NSI, and you came into NSI and we have had these conversations. And from that time, it's been really valuable to me because I am the anxious type. And what would happen is I would see something that would trigger the jealousy, and then I would just be like, I'm out. I would feel myself withdraw from the relationship. The walls would go up. I would pull back. I would stop sharing with the person. I would be like planning my exit strategy,
Yep. So a
like,
disorganized, yeah. So you have a
yeah,
disorganized response, right? Like
yes.
I'm anxious, I'm hypervigilant, and
And
bonus,
I'm
also I'll
also
bail.
bolting.
Right.
Exactly. And so what I started to do is recognize the internal somatic sensations of that activation so that I don't just 100% believe the story that this isn't a safe relationship, especially as I've been in a safe relationship working through my attachment patterns in that relationship. But I can feel the internal cues. And instead of just going right into the reaction, like this is something I need to regulate around. And sometimes there are places where I need to set some boundaries, like you said. And sometimes there are places where I just need to learn to repattern some of those responses to process the emotion, to have compassion with myself so that I can, and I don't just go into shame for having the jealousy. So as we're talking about all of this, as we reframe jealousy, not as like a character flaw or deficit, but as that protective output of the nervous system, and you work with people when they have that altitude, how does that start to shift the conversation for the couples or the clients that you work with? This November, we're diving into a topic that I'm really excited about: hormones, stress, and the female nervous system in a brand new live workshop happening November 13th at 12 p.m. Central Time. I'll be joined by Veronica Rotman, founder of Soma School and an NSI certified practitioner who specializes in the female nervous system and cyclical somatic practices. Together, we'll explore how hormone cycles shape stress responses, mood, and capacity, and how to integrate applied neurology and somatics to support your system through the different phases of your cycle. Whether you're a practitioner or you're just curious about how your own body works, this workshop will give you a new understanding of the connection between hormones, the brain, and the nervous system. Join us live or catch the replay. You can register at neurosomaticintelligence.com/workshops.
Well, the very first thing is jealousy stops being either you fix this because you caused the feeling in me. We want to move away from that. And we also move away from this is just a me thing. Like it's my feeling, so it's just mine. And we actually put it in the both and category, into the space where I can actively learn to regulate and repattern around jealousy, but I also can notice, am I in a safer relationship context? Or am I not? Is this actually my pattern? Do I continually find myself choosing people who will trigger jealousy because jealousy itself feels like love to me? Do I keep putting myself in this same situation over and over again? So I move out of me or we and into yes. It is both of these, and we need to look at the whole system. And that's one of the reasons people, I think, get frustrated with jealousy is it takes time. It takes time, and generally speaking, I will see people experience a real shift in how they work with jealousy when they've been working with it for months into years, not weeks. And it's not, they can absolutely learn to regulate their jealousy, their internal experience in one session. Absolutely. You can learn to come into a new relationship with it. You can learn to notice it, name it, and do some NSI around it. Fantastic. But to actually work with jealousy as a source of wisdom for self and my relationship to others, I need to give it time and allow myself to learn what is that wisdom, because it could be pointing to some much larger relational truths for me that need to be worked through in some deep work.
And I think this is a great lead into self-compassion, jealousy, and shame, because one thing that I've noticed when you mentioned the phrase like, I deserve this, for me, that really hit me because what I'm noticing recently is how loud the voice is that takes the blame for things.
Yes.
I'm the one,
Yeah.
it's my fault.
Me too.
It's
Me
just
too,
my
Jennifer.
fault. No matter what happens, dog eats cat poop, that's my fault.
Yep.
I shouldn't
Yep.
have done. So it's always like goes back to me somehow for taking the blame. And I think that is what I'm noticing really triggers that shame response too. So if it's my fault, then I deserve this. These are two like they are copacetic
Yep.
narratives. And so I think many people experience secondary shame after jealousy about that, like, what's wrong with me? I shouldn't be feeling like this. And that shame can be really corrosive, more corrosive than I think jealousy itself can. And it leads to secrecy, self-criticism, and mostly disconnection. That shame shuts down curiosity, and it blocks relational repair and emotional processing. In your work, you talk about how jealousy is so often tangled up with shame. Why do you think people feel like they're not even supposed to have this emotion? And what happens in relationships when jealousy gets hidden under layers of shame instead of being acknowledged?
Yeah. There are a few sources for why shame is so tightly tied. Let's look at the macro culture first, because just look, we call jealousy the green eyed monster. We depict it in cartoons as like gnarly little cartoon figures and they're, all haggard, right? When there's a jealous character in a TV sitcom, they are not depicted kindly. When we want to look at jealousy, when we're going to, plaster it up on the big screen, it's generally made pretty ugly. And so at that level, and that hits us not just on an entertainment level, that hits us on an archetypal level. It comes that rushes into my body and hits something that is eternal in me. Like, oh, jealousy equals bad. For thousands and thousands of years, jealousy has equaled bad in our storytelling. That didn't come from nowhere. So we could surmise that likely that also came from oral tradition beforehand. It's just been there, so prevalent that jealousy is seen as attached to evil.
Mm.
And so from that, now let's like go a layer deeper. Now I have what's the culture I grew up in? How did I see jealousy enacted? Most of us only even recognize jealousy when it was pretty miserable, right? Maybe we saw our parents caught in a jealousy spiral. Maybe there was betrayal and jealousy, or maybe one of our parents really had a hyper reaction to any jealous input, and they would just spiral out and blame, and maybe they'd throw plates at our father or what. Who knows what happens? But all of that also enters into our narrative of like, what does it mean to feel jealousy? Then we can think about like the school playgrounds and what happens when people are accused of jealousy. It comes with this really strong negative social connotation. And this is so difficult because now jealousy itself can feel like social exclusion. I will lose this valued other. And now, oh, wait, if I am perceived by the general populace as jealous, I will also be excluded because ew, yuck. That is too much for the nervous system to bear. And what does this do? I mean, it brings shame, right? Shame happens not just from the outside, but from the inside when I start to say, this just is inherently bad. And so we have to take jealousy out of the shadows and start normalizing the experience of jealousy. And that to me is how when we take it out of the shadows, we start talking about jealousy as a normal thing. It's why I proudly claim now I am a jealous person. I am a person who experiences jealousy very easily. I do not have a super high tolerance for it. What I do know is what to do when it shows up. So I do not behave in ways that are harmful to myself or others. That's not the same as saying, I'm not jealous. And when I do that, all I hope for every time I do it is I hope I reach somebody else who feels like, yep, it's just bad. It's just bad to be jealous. And that can also come, we can think about how men are conditioned to not admit jealousy, but also to be in rageful acts when jealousy shows up. Women are often conditioned to experience jealousy as something like, oh, I'm so insecure. Ew, ew, ew. And then we disappear, we pull back, we don't reach out, we don't reach to our connections. The shame piece of this keeps us separated from the wisdom that jealousy has, the way it might inform me about whether my relationships are actually safe, and it keeps us culturally locked in a story that says jealousy itself is the icky thing, And you should feel bad if you feel it. And we could just go around and around like this for another 1,000 years if we don't undo it now in our day-to-day lives.
I so agree with that, and I think that saying I'm not jealous or I don't ever experience jealousy is like the same as saying I don't experience grief or I don't get angry. Like there are emotions and we experience all of them as part of this human experience, and being able to recognize that, talk about it, get support, metabolize it, process the emotion, that is how we get to the other side of it. And there is so much stigma. I think the things that you talked about, and for me also too, I linked jealousy to mental health issues, like
Mhm.
if I, because of these big experiences of jealousy, like the other big emotions I was experiencing, I was crazy. And that if I showed that to somebody or if somebody pointed it out to me, they were calling me crazy. And then that whole tag comes up of like, feeling those systems of being called crazy for your emotional experience, and that would lead to a lot of fighting and a lot of shutting down and all the things. Um, so I think jealousy is part of this broader category of difficult emotions that we're often taught to avoid and suppress. And then the problem with that is it keeps us stuck in these protective patterns. We did a episode a little bit ago with Matt on emotional regulation and impaired integration. And with more difficult emotions, there can be more difficulty having that emotional processing experience and then really integrating that experience at a brain function level, at a brain body level to make these states, like when we can do that, then we're starting to learn at a nervous system level that having this experience is survivable. I can metabolize this. There is some meaning that comes from this. But then when that integration is impaired, the emotions become overwhelming or they lead us to shut down and disconnect completely. And thinking about all of this, how do you see jealousy as an entry point into rebuilding emotional regulation skill?
Mm. Well, I think one reason it is a great entry point is it is so intense. So, like the same thing that makes it challenging to integrate is, yeah, but it gets your attention, doesn't it? So, the fact that it has gotten my attention is actually that's all I start with. I'm feeling something. I wanna just say, if the word jealousy itself is a huge trigger for you, fine, let's start with the word insecure, or let's start with the word worried, right? Those are perfectly fine words to be just tracking for in your awareness. When you're talking about a valued relationship, are you using these words? You may not be using the word jealous because that might not feel okay. Or like my husband, you may not have ever learned to tie the word jealousy to what you were feeling. And so you might not have that. But if you find yourself experiencing periods of insecurity, periods where you find yourself dysregulated with nothing really clear to point to except you desperately want to go somehow like latch on to your person, whoever it is that you're connected to. You want to just like grab them. Those are cues that I can start with, and from there, we could start to work with jealousy as a premise. Like, what if it were jealousy? What if and now I like to go immediately to reframing. What if you're afraid this relationship won't be there tomorrow? Just that. What if you're afraid of that? And if it's because you're afraid there's an interruption, you may feel even less control, right? If there's an interruption, this is why jealousy is a little different from anger or sadness, because there's an automatic third party in it. And that third party is often what we feel like we have no control, no say. We don't understand where it's coming from or why this third person has entered my area, right? That offers me a lot of opportunity though to turn inward and start noticing just at a sensation level. What is going on? At a sensation level, jealousy is very, very different. When I can get people who are feeling like jealousy is a huge problem for them to just get down to the sensations, they usually describe twisting in the gut, constriction in the chest, heaviness, heat. Sometimes they'll describe constriction in the throat or tingles. And sometimes they'll describe total numbness, which, we know numb is a feeling too. Like there's a sensation there. But if they can get to the sensation, that's enough information for me to start realizing, well, this isn't nothing then, because the sensation is in me. There's a reclamation there. And this is a different reclamation than, Jennifer, what you and I agreed on. I am willing to take responsibility for everything because I feel like that's how I was wired by my parents. Thank you. Sorry. I was wired to believe that I needed to fix everything and I was responsible for everything. But this is different. This is, I get to. I get to work with these sensations. They're not, oh my God, this jealousy is mine and the cause of it must be mine. It's the sensation started in me, so I can start to work with it differently. And from there, I could wind up at a completely different point of interpretation. And that opens up so much space, so very much space.
I think these sensations, like we're talking about jealousy being a portal, right? Like these sensations are real portals to emotional processing and to self-compassion, to start giving yourself a little bit of love and some grace for what you didn't know and what you do know now, and maybe like a better understanding of like where all of this stems from.
Yeah.
Yeah.
When I have that information, that's my starting point also, to be able to talk to a partner who may not feel like they're doing anything that's worthy of my jealousy. So I am lucky currently not to have any partners who are like this, but this is not uncommon for somebody to say, I've already reassured you. I'm not doing anything. This isn't real. All unhelpful to the system, right? This is because the threat mechanism is already it's happening. The threat detection system has gone off, and we don't actually want. I don't want to shut off the check engine light by just unplugging that wire. I want to address what is setting off the check engine light. If my partner is tired of reassuring me, or they really don't feel that they're doing anything that should inspire jealousy, now I'm in both an internal thing and I'm in a relational snafu. I got some trouble because we have to actually sort through what's going on in that relationship, especially if this is on a continual basis. It keeps coming around and my partner just keeps saying, nope, this is a you thing. Go deal with it. I do want to take responsibility, and the sensations give me the very first thing I need to do that. And at the same time, jealousy being a social emotion, I also want to enter into a discussion with this person around what's going on in this relationship. What are the narratives? How are they triggering my threat detection system? How is any of that addressable? Could we reformat this relationship to create a deeper sense of safety, not through control, but through understanding, through insight, through understanding, and also understanding what are the ground rules of this relationship. Like I said, I deal mostly with complex relationships where, yep, there are going to be other valued partners in your partner's life. So we have to learn how to deal with that. And so for those of us who are monogamous, we still need that. We need to understand, how do I talk with my partner so that we create clarity around what my expectations are? Because if I don't have clear, explicit expectations, then my partner probably won't be willing to co-regulate with me, to enter into those really nourishing dialogues that help me understand that this relationship can be a safe place. Most relationships rely far too much on implicit expectation and assumption, and not enough on explicit, let's be clear. What are the expectations here?
I think that's so true. Maybe even especially more in a monogamous relationship where you're not having to navigate these things, there is so much
Absolutely.
reliance on explicit expectations. And it has been so helpful to me to be able to dialogue with my partner around this, and what are the boundaries that we agree on, that we feel like are securing safety for us, safer to the best of our ability, and where don't we want to compromise on some things, and just navigating all of that, because What would also happen is, and I'm sure that you see this a lot, is if somebody does something to activate, to trigger jealousy in someone else, and they talk about it, then the other person can get really defensive and have shame of that narrative of "I'm bad" coming up, and then their defensiveness coming with that, and then they project onto the other person, and then the other person
Yeah.
interprets that and has more shame, and it can just really go down a spiral unless you can have these conversations and decide on some agreements and some boundaries.
Absolutely, and you are so wise to point out I actually find that monogamous people in general have higher levels of unreported jealousy, like, they're not talking about jealousy, and this is where I find, like so non-monogamy and monogamy are not two totally separate things, it's a spectrum. Everybody is experiencing their monogamy as their own, everybody who's doing that, and we should be having explicit conversations. So this is a place where we can use the tools that we would apply in non-monogamy to actually make our monogamous relationships more conscious, more values centered, and explicit. And that's ideal, right? That because that threat detection system is going to go off anyways. But if I believe monogamy itself, just being in a monogamous relationship will inherently protect me from jealousy, well, look around. It it's clearly not, um, or we would have solved the jealousy problem by now because monogamy does make up the vast majority of adult romantic relationships. So it doesn't solve the problem. So what we need to do is bring ourselves back into conversation. And like you said, if your partner receives an accusation, if they receive your jealousy as an accusation of their behavior, if they feel threatened, they're known now they are not the calm nervous system in the room that can co-regulate you. So we need to normalize conversations of jealousy, just like we absolutely can make room around the jealousy conversation by having conversations about being attracted to other people without this being a threat. Because if we make more things explicit, we understand the difference between being attracted to someone and acting on attraction. Those are two entirely different things. Just like being jealous is not the same as acting on my jealousy.
Mhm.
I can be jealous of my partner receiving attention from somebody while I'm watching him across the room and still say, yeah, but we have a lot of explicit clarity in this relationship. I can feel my jealousy and still experience, yep, and I'm safe. I can be present to that because of how much clarity I have, how much I understand what the edges are of our actions, our behavior. And that comes through having conversations that monogamy would tell you we don't need to have them. You just use the one rule to rule them all. Have the conversations instead. Your nervous system will thank you for those conversations.
Yeah, I think it's so new to bring the nervous system into a conversation about jealousy because, like you were saying earlier, we get all these cultural messages, the green eyed monster about, jealousy being toxic and insecurity and immature. And that is leading us to more shame and more shutdown and all the things that we've discussed earlier. But there's also, um, when it comes down to a personal flaw, this also comes into clinical pathologizing. And in some psychology literature, jealousy is associated only with pathology of morbid jealousy, jealousy as a symptom of borderline or narcissistic traits. And this really obscures the normal adaptive aspects of jealousy that we're talking about today. And I think that even leads to more feelings of someone feeling broken versus having this universal human response. So I think today's conversation is just so important.
Yeah. Yeah, the clinical pathologization of jealousy is really just an outgrowth of our cultural pathologization. It just we just knee-jerk react to jealousy in a big way. And so many people when they bring it into the therapeutic room, they don't feel received fully, right? If it is immediately put into this context of like, "Oh, it's really bad." And that can be addressed by simply bringing jealousy into the range of emotions that we talk about. So for all the clinicians listening, yeah, normalize it. Talk about jealousy proactively. And I don't think any therapist means to over pathologize jealousy. It's just that we're not having that broader conversation and it gets ignored. Go look at the studies on jealousy. There uh, there are some problems. There are some gaps in our literature. And as we develop a more intricate understanding of jealousy, we can see how, yep, when it hits pathological levels, jealousy can be deadly. It is profound. But there are everyday mundane experiences of jealousy that I'm very grateful for in my life. They have helped me actually create the relationships that I want to have. And they've helped me have conversations that actually move me into support of the actual people I'm partnered to, not some version of them that doesn't have any problems and never feels certain ways, but who they actually are.
Yeah. And we've touched on this a little bit, but it's important to process jealousy somatically in the body like we would with all of the other emotions because it doesn't just stay in the mind. It is a physical state expressed through the nervous system. Signals could be racing heart, stomach drop, chest tightness, heat in the face, clenched jaw. And if those body cues and sensations aren't processed, jealousy keeps us in protective patterns and states. And so there are some really practical things that you can do to begin working with this emotion. There's grounding practices like respiration tools, gentle movement, and self-touch. Pairing a jealousy trigger recall with regulation tools can engage memory reconsolidation. And that comes from a study from Einerson. Nadar and Einerson, updating the brain's predictive coding so the trigger no longer sets off the same cascade. Movement and compassionate imagery rewires survival predictions by pairing threat cues with new signals and safety and compassion.
Yeah, I always think it's so important to give people some little bit of practical tools. And like I was talking about before, when I was talking about my disorganized attachment, let's be real, being hypervigilant and then wanting to flee, like what do I do in those moments? And it starts by noticing the physical cues, the things that Jen was just talking about, and then doing something. Usually it's some NSI tools, but it could be as simple as like some long exhale breaths or some sensory stimulus for my feet to help my nervous system regulate through that response. And then maybe layering in a little bit of self-compassion. This is an experience of jealousy. It makes sense. This is an adaptive protective response. And like that both and that you were talking about. And the truth is, I'm safe right now. And allowing that duality to exist, processing some of the stress somatically, and then evaluating like what action do I want to take in this situation, but working with the body and the nervous system first in response to the physical cues.
Yeah, it's so important to take these steps. And my qualitative research described, what were people who were managing jealousy well? Like, what were they doing? That's what I was looking at was, oh, yeah, the number one thing they all had in common, and they had stumbled across it. They had figured it out in their lives in different ways. Nobody had taught them explicitly. They had learned to just notice jealousy, name it, and just be with it. Just be with the sensations as they come up and not panic just because it was present, right? They didn't add panic to that experience. It's incredibly powerful to then layer in, as you said, a positive affirmation of I can be here in this moment. And that's true, even if the jealousy is pointing to something that could eventually become a lack of safety. In this moment, I've had moments where what I've experienced is an interruption. Oh, somebody who's actually going to interrupt my life. Oh, and as I start to work with it, I start to realize this threat is real in that, yeah, it may in fact break up my relationship. But grounding into any given moment, right? Moment by moment, regulation still let me choose a path forward that was actually advantageous versus dysregulation and then spiraling into the doomsdaying or the action that actually leads me to now be the person who's taking harmful action. And that just reverses the whole picture. If I get spun up and now I become violent, I had a person in an interview for my study talk about getting violent, and how everything turned because the jealousy was real. Like it was real. It was an authentic expression of, yep, I see how my relationship is breaking up. But then she got violent. And when she did, she lost a lot of her options for how she could navigate this relationship moving forward, not together, but forward. Um, so just being allowed to like be with the sensations, I think is so powerful. Not just, oh, I'll feel better, but no, you're going to give yourself more options. No matter how difficult this situation really is, you will have more options if you can be with it moment to moment.
Yeah. And that takes capacity, right?
Yeah.
And then it's, why we do this work of developing capacity in the nervous system and capacity to modulate and regulate. And I think it's just a very deep conversation on why this is so important for many layers of self-health, but also collective healing as well. And I'm really grateful for the conversation. I think it's been a really profound one. Are there any closing thoughts that you would want to share with listeners?
Yeah, truly, it comes down to this. Jealousy is something I would like to see everybody talking with others about, and not just in our romantic contexts. I really think that, like, the next generation of children have the opportunity to have parents who talked with them about jealousy when it showed up when they were toddlers, when it showed up when they're in middle school, like talking about jealousy, naming it. Oh, I see that. Don't push it under the rug. Don't say, oh, that's just jealousy. And don't say, oh, jealousy, that means that they like you. No, talk about the jealousy. Talk about all the grimy bits and the shiny bits that are in there. And that also goes for our friendships. Let's talk about jealousy when we are able to have a little perspective, and when our partners, not our partners, when our friends bring a jealous moment to us. Oh my gosh, be the person that can just sit and listen and doesn't immediately move to fixing. If you've got the skills and the capacity to co-regulate with that person and to be present, to be the calm nervous system in the room with them, let them tell their story without jumping to fixing, because we don't yet know, right? We will jump right to, oh my gosh, that should never happen. Go do this, break up with them, go. What if we start having conversations where we say, jealousy shows up. Let's listen more closely. Let's slow down a little bit. That's what I would love to see happen.
And I would love to see people have a little bit of change in language and notice that when they're envious of something and when they're being jealous with that third person come in. And I think that already is a compassionate call for our listeners is, understanding those sensations in the body, work in your nervous system, like learn what your triggers are. And hopefully it's compassionate to even have more open conversations with people, and then notice how the sensations move around in your body and notice what shifts when you do offer yourself some self-compassion.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Amazing. Joli, we will have all of the links where people can find you. Joli has a TEDx talk. She's a published author, podcasts. You have an amazing podcast and coaching program. So we will have the links to all of that in the show notes. And then if this conversation resonated with you, please subscribe to the podcast so you don't miss any of the episodes coming up, and share it with somebody who might want to also be in these conversations about jealousy. Share it with someone that it could help.
Thank you, Joli. It was so nice to see you.
Thank you so much, both of you, for having me on. It was great to talk with you again.
It really was great to see you again.
If you're listening to this and resonating with the outputs, burnout, anxiety, disconnection, struggles with emotions, and realizing it might actually be your nervous system doing its best to protect you, we're here for that. At rewiretrial.com, you can start experiencing the tools and the practices that we talk about on Trauma Rewired every episode, and start training your nervous system with me and our team of neurosomatic intelligence certified practitioners for a free 2-week trial with 5 live classes a week, plus a huge on-demand library of practices. These aren't mindset tricks or affirmations. They're neurosomatic tools that actually rewire your brain and your body to process stress and emotions safely. You'll learn to create calm, focus, and resilience from the inside out. Join us at rewiretrial.com and see what's possible when we work at the root level together in community. Again, that's rewiretrial.com for a 2 free week trial.